How do you stop an army from becoming corrupt? It's a massive problem that topples governments even today. But what if a solution was actually designed like 1400 years ago? Today, we're going to dive into some incredible research from Zahir Ahmed Mir's book, The Foundation of Islamic Jurisprudence, to explore a 7th century administrative marvel, the Diwān al-Jund.
Okay, so just imagine this for a second. You're leading a brand new state, and it's expanding way faster than anyone could have predicted. Your biggest headache? How do you turn a fighting force that's built on, tribal loyalties into a professional army that's loyal only to the state? How do you possibly make it fair and, even harder, incorruptible?
Now, this wasn't some theoretical problem. It was the exact challenge staring the second caliph, Hazrat Umar ibn al-Khattab, right in the face. With territories growing at an unbelievable rate, he needed an army that wasn't loyal to a person or to a tribe, but to the state itself. And his solution? Well, it was an administrative masterstroke called the Diwān al-Jund.
It's really easy to look at the Diwān and just think, oh, it's a simple payroll list. But that's not even close to the whole story. It was so much more revolutionary. Think of it more like a constitutional framework for the entire military, a system that defined not just pay, but rights, responsibilities, and a crystal-clear chain of accountability.
Right, so at its very heart, the system was built on an idea that was, frankly, radical for its time: justice over privilege. This wasn't about rewarding your buddies or your family. It was about creating a genuine meritocracy. So how on earth did it actually work? So how did they enforce this meritocracy? Well, compensation wasn't just some arbitrary number. It was based on a soldier's actual history and commitment. Things like their length of service, personal sacrifices they'd made, their level of responsibility, and even how early they had accepted Islam. It was a really transparent system, all designed to honor true contribution.
But protecting the system from corruption was just as important as building it. And there were 3 rules that were just absolute. First, every single soldier got paid, which kept morale high. Second, every family was cared for, so soldiers could serve without having to worry. And maybe most crucially, rank was not hereditary. You had to earn your position, period.
And this brings us to the sheer administrative genius of the Diwān. It wasn't just ethically sound on paper, it was practically foolproof in its execution. It was basically an anti-corruption blueprint, with integrity literally built into its very design. The administrative cycle itself was just meticulous. It all started with central registers in the capital, Medina. Then, all the provincial records had to perfectly sync up with this master list. There were regular audits to catch any discrepancies, and on top of that, annual in-person verifications. If any error was found, it was corrected right then and there. It was a nearly foolproof, closed-loop system. And what if you tried to cheat this system? The consequences were severe. Falsifying records wasn't just treated like a minor crime, it was considered khiyana, a profound betrayal of trust against the entire state. This basically elevated administrative honesty to a core moral principle. The effect of all this was, well, profound. This administrative system didn't just organize the army, it completely transformed its entire culture. It created an army that was truly, genuinely bound by law. I mean, the transformation was just stark. Look at this comparison. Before the Diwān, loyalty was all about your tribe or maybe a powerful commander. Afterwards, it was about a constitution and the law. Opportunism got replaced by discipline, and soldiers could now fight knowing their families back home were totally secure. And here's the part that is just incredible to think about. This was all accomplished in the 7th century. No databases, no spreadsheets, no complex government ministries like we know them today. It was all achieved with written registers, guided purely by brilliant constitutional logic and a really powerful ethical framework. So why are we talking about a 1,400-year-old system? Because its principles are absolutely timeless, and they echo directly into the massive challenges of our modern world.
Just look at the headlines today. Ghost soldiers, fake names on a payroll just to steal funds. Corrupt defense budgets, armies that are loyal to a politician, not the nation. These are the exact problems the Diwān was designed to prevent.
The Diwān's solution can really be boiled down to a powerful, simple formula. Transparency plus documentation equals security and justice. It's an equation for integrity that is just as true today as it was back in the 7th century. The big takeaway here is that this was about something far more sophisticated than just building a powerful army. This was not militarization. It was the constitutionalization of force. And that is such a profound idea, taking the most dangerous element of a state, its ability to use violence, and binding it completely with law, accountability, and justice. And that really leaves us with a final, pretty challenging question. If a 7th century administration could pull off this level of transparency and fairness without any of our technology, we just have to ask ourselves, what's our excuse? What holds us back today? To get rid of ghost soldiers. These are names on a military payroll for people who don't actually exist. They're phantoms literally draining public money, weakening national security, and they're a symptom of this deep-seated corruption that plagues defense departments all over the world, even right now. Now, your first thought is probably, okay, we need sophisticated software, biometric IDs, all this high-tech stuff to solve that. But what if I told you that a leader in the 7th century, in the middle of a rapidly expanding state, figured out a system so solid, so robust, that it made that kind of corruption almost impossible? Well, this is the story of that solution. But before we jump back in time to see this solution, we really have to get our heads around why this problem is just so timeless. The challenges of building a transparent, accountable military, they aren't about technology. They're about the fundamental principles of good government. Just think about it for a second. When you've got ghost soldiers, that's money being directly siphoned off by corrupt officials. When defense budgets are totally opaque, well, there's zero public accountability. And maybe the most dangerous part, when an army's loyalty is to a specific person or tribe instead of the state itself, it just becomes a political tool, not a protector of the people. These things don't just waste money, they completely erode trust and can literally lead to a state failing. And that right there is the key. These are not new modern failures. Nope, they are the fundamental challenges every single state faces when it starts to grow. How do you manage huge resources? How do you make sure people are loyal to the institution, not just one guy? And how do you build a system based on justice that can actually stand up to human greed? Well, back in the 7th century, the early Islamic State was expanding faster than anyone could believe, and it ran head-on into this massive challenge. So how did they pull it off? The second caliph, Hazrat Umar ibn al-Khattab, was leading a state that was just exploding in size. He had to organize, pay, and maintain this massive, victorious army. And it was made up of all these different tribal groups, each with its own loyalties, spread out over thousands of miles. How could you possibly forge a single professional force out of all that? Just try to imagine the scene for a minute. The military was this chaotic mix of tribal fighters. There were no central records, no standard pay. Your compensation was often just a share of whatever was captured on the battlefield, a system that pretty much encourages opportunism, not duty. It was an environment that was just ripe for shifting loyalties and a total lack of discipline. Honestly, it was a recipe for disaster, not the foundation for a stable state. The solution Hazrat Umar put in place was, well, it was genius. It wasn't just some payroll list. It was a complete system, an institution. It was called the Diwān al-Jund, and you can really think of it as the world's first central ministry of defense. It was a public register that meticulously recorded every single soldier, their service history, and the compensation they had earned, creating a direct, unbreakable link between the individual and the state. Now, here's the thing that made the Diwān a true game changer. It wasn't just that it was efficient. It was that its entire foundation was built on justice and fairness. This was a system designed from the ground up to reward merit, not who your father was, not your tribal connections. So how did it work? Well, the pay wasn't just a flat rate. It was a really sophisticated merit-based system. Your stipend was determined by your history and your contribution. Were you one of the first to embrace Islam? That showed commitment. How long have you served? That demonstrated seniority. Were you there at the pivotal Battle of Badr? That honored immense sacrifice. And finally, what was your level of responsibility? This created a structure that rewarded real, verifiable contributions to the community. And a truly just system isn't only about rewards, right? It's also about protection. The Diwān was so much more than a payroll office. It was a comprehensive social safety net for the entire military and their families, designed to give them real security and stability in a pretty dangerous world. And these guarantees, wow, they were absolutely groundbreaking for their time. Every single soldier was paid and paid on time. If they fell in battle, their families received a pension. And maybe most importantly, rank and privilege were earned, not inherited. It didn't matter who your father was, your position was your own. This just shattered the old cycles of aristocratic privilege and held every single person accountable to the exact same system of justice.
Okay, so this is where your mind is probably a little bit blown. We're talking about managing a detailed registry for an army that's spread across thousands of miles, all the way from North Africa to Persia. How on earth did they do this with 7th century technology? The answer is in its meticulous, multi-layered administrative structure. So here's how they did it. There was a master register in the capital, Medina. That was the single source of truth. Then, each province had its own Diwān, and it had to be perfectly synchronized with that central register. And get this, regular audits and painstaking cross-checks, especially during the annual salary reviews, made sure everything was accurate. If even one error was found, it was fixed on the spot. This basically closed every single loophole for fraud, making ghost soldiers totally impossible.
The ethical weight of this whole system is really captured in one Arabic word, khiyana. Now, this doesn't just mean fraud. It means a betrayal of a sacred trust. To mess with the records wasn't just a crime. It was seen as a deep moral failing, an offense against God and the entire community. This embedded integrity right into the DNA of the bureaucracy itself. So you see, this is the really big takeaway. The Diwān's impact went way beyond just an efficient payroll. By creating this system of predictable rules, rights, and responsibilities, it fundamentally reshaped the entire identity of the soldier and the ethics of the whole army. It professionalized them.
I mean, just look at the before and after here. The transformation is just incredible. Before, a fighter's loyalty was to his tribe. His motivation was often the spoils of war. His security, totally dependent on his tribal connections. But now, under the Diwān, his allegiance was to the state and its laws. His motivation became duty, backed up by a regular salary, and his security and his family's was guaranteed by the state. Commanders were no longer just charismatic warlords. They were accountable administrators inside a constitutional framework.
This quote from our source material really says it all. The Diwān transformed the army from just a collection of personal loyalties into a true institution of the state, governed entirely by law. And that is a foundational step in building any modern, stable nation.
Okay, so let's bring all this history back to our world today, because the legacy of the Diwān al-Jund is not just some historical curiosity. Its principles and its structures were so incredibly forward-thinking, they basically foreshadowed systems that would take the rest of the world centuries and centuries to develop.
Think about these modern institutions for a second. Every soldier in a modern army has a service number, right? That's a direct descendant of the Diwān's register. We have veterans' pension systems to care for those who served. We have centralized payrolls to prevent fraud. We have ministries of defense. All of these are built on the exact same core logic that was pioneered by the Diwān back in the 7th century.
And here's the part that is just so remarkable. This was all done without computers, without massive office buildings, without the complex administrative state that we know today. It was guided purely by a clear constitutional logic and the ethical principles of Islam. It was a system built on ideas, not just infrastructure.
Which brings us right back to the beginning. What can modern states, still struggling with corruption and politicized armies, learn from this 1,400-year-old system? What's the real takeaway for any of us interested in good governance and the rule of law?
Well, the lesson boils down to this simple but incredibly powerful formula. Transparency plus documentation equals security and justice. You just can't have one without the other. That was the central genius insight of the Diwān al-Jund.
And this is the final, most crucial thing we have to understand. If you walk away from this thinking the point of the Diwān was just to build an efficient fighting machine, you've missed the entire point. The ultimate goal was something so much bigger, so much more profound. The true purpose was to build a just society. It was about creating a system that formally honored the courage of its people, that fairly compensated their sacrifice, and most importantly of all, that disciplined raw power by subjecting it to the rule of law.
So don't think of this as the militarization of society. It wasn't about putting the army at the center of everything. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was the constitutionalization of force. It was about taking the most dangerous element of any state, its monopoly on violence, and binding it with rules, with accountability, and with justice. It was about ensuring that power serves the law, and not the other way around.
And that is a lesson that is just as urgent and relevant today as it was 14 centuries ago.